Hello, and welcome to another episode of the podcast, which we don't know the name of.
Good afternoon, Toronto. Yeah, we are your hosts, your co-hosts, Yawer and Nabil, and we are still trying to figure things out. Right now we have a kind of like a interim name, and we're not gonna name the name right now in case we decide to change it later, and we don't want to go around about editing audio files and re-uploading and republishing. So we'll leave that for later. But yeah, today we are, you know, interested in talking about a subject that's really close to my heart, and I think Nabil as well. You are very interested in this as well. We're talking about energy. Energy. So, what is energy? Why do we want to talk about it? Obviously, everybody is aware in today's world that there's a lot of discussions about energy, the future, the climate crisis, the war in Ukraine. All of these things are inextricably interlinked, and there are many issues to discuss. But let's lay the groundwork for just a little bit. Why is this so important, right? And why are we heading into the climate crisis? Well, because as a technologically advanced, to a certain extent, advanced civilization, uh, humankind needs energy, and we need massive amounts of energy to power all of our systems on this world. If you drastically reduce how much energy you consume, you are going to drastically reduce the quality of life and the amount of life that can be supported, human life that can be supported by this planet. Energy is required for everything from improving crop yields to running hospital intensive care units to production systems and even AIs like ChatGPT, which need energy to survive. So it's pretty important. But yeah, I'm just gonna ask Nabil here. What's your perspective on it?
I think you can see the inflation across the globe that's happening, and there are three major aspects to that inflation. One is a food crisis, food support prices. How much does food cost? Um, the other one is definitely energy, and the third one is the financial aspect of it. The banks and all of that. But the Ukraine war highlighted how how the dependence of energy on a global scale across countries um, is has been a foundation of globalization and therefore economic growth across the world. um, and it has brought out what challenges we are facing, and those challenges uh, are across the spectrum of the energy needs that we have. So it covers nuclear, it covers oil and gas, it covers batteries because storage is important. It covers, well, we talk about, okay, so if we're getting off of oil and gas, we need to still fulfill that energy somehow. Where are we headed? How are we going to do this? Because we still need the energy. We have, where do we find the opportunities for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, it's very interesting because as Russia, continues the war in Ukraine, Europe and its allies, the U.S. and everybody, have condemned and sanctioned Russia. But at the same time, they have continued to buy Russian fuel every day, massive amounts, and sending money to Russia because the European countries are worried. They are energy insecure. They're worried about fuel prices. They're extremely worried about people. Uh, uh, you know, going, protesting against the government's mismanagement and or perceived mismanagement or perceived failures to secure low energy prices because people are very very sensitive to energy costs like you and I. If you think about our household energy expenditure, if what would happen if our energy costs were to double tomorrow from tomorrow onwards?
I would add on that it's not just that they're conscious about energy costs, but they're also, to a large degree, my generation, our generation, and the younger generation has been educated that about climate change and the relationship between some energy form production formats and climate change. So, for example, it's not that Europe doesn't have coal; it has very dirty coal. It has very and it will take 2 3 years to get those coal uh, power.
Refined.
Yeah, no, not refined. The power stations back up because they're like really old power
Ah,
stations,
yeah,
pre-nuclear, pre-oil and gas.
right.
So a power station built in the 1950s, if you're retrofitting it for
Dirty
production,
coal. Yeah,
for from dirty coal, it's going to be still, even at the best of technologies that you use, it's going to take some time to retrofit it, and it's still going to be
yeah.
dirty
That's a good point.
in some, at some level. So on the one hand, the Dutch government is trying to get rid of particular farmers and production methodologies because it's too dirty, yet you're introducing very dirty coal based energy. It creates a large amount of friction between different segments of society, because you can't have it. You can't on the one hand introduce something dirty and on the other go like, hey, we're cleaning our act up. It doesn't work that way. You got to be consistent on the messaging you know
Yeah, and how did Europe get into this situation where it has this dependency? Well, I feel like from what I've read, and I can cite sources on this, uh, Angela Merkel's leadership of Germany and by extension pretty much of Europe, the policy was basically that we should try to establish rapprochement with Russia, right?
Hmm.
To kind of rehabilitate them into the international community by establishing economic dependency between Europe and Russia. So Russia is dependent on European money, and Europe is dependent on Russian fuel. So it's a win-win situation. It's good business for everybody, and it also doesn't hurt that we secure in Europe a cheap supply of hydrocarbons while we scramble to set up our renewable energy systems to replace hydrocarbon in maybe a few decades from now. So that was the policy, right? So we kind of walked blindly or with our eyes open into this Russian trap of, being addicted to Russian energy while at the same time condemning Russia for their, different aggressions. Anyway, so leaving that aside for the time being, um, we do want to discuss the alternatives, right? What can we do with it? Maybe it's not the time for recriminations. Maybe it's time to figure out solutions. So, what are the solutions to the climate crisis? I think, Nabil, you had a very simple and obvious but very difficult solution as well, right?
Yeah, and so I worked on this particular technologies, a set of technologies related to this about 10 years ago, which is insulation and retrofitting existing houses, um, with the right materials, with the right construction, with the right retrofits. It can you can save up to 70% of energy for home usage, which drives down your personal bill first of all. So a home's personal bill, and then it also drives down how much energy is being actually used up at the home, and therefore the national grid. um,
Well, that sounds like a pretty amazing and in fact, dream solution to the whole problem, to like a big part of the problem. So,
yes.
what's the problem? Why aren't we
And
doing this
we are, but here's part of the challenge. So if you and we'll probably post a link to this in the
in the show notes?
in the show notes, because this is something, if you're not aware of, you should definitely go check it out. If you are a homeowner in Canada, there are massive amounts of money available for you to retrofit your house. So you can improve your insulation. You can have digital smart thermostats installed. The government will
Like
subsidize.
Nest and Ecobee and those kind of
Yeah,
things?
yeah. The government will Nest, Ecobee, etc. The government will subsidize these implementations, and there's a list of them. There's like 6 7 different programs out there. Um, Here's the challenge, though. Those programs are pretty much geared towards homeowners, not condo owners, not renters, homeowners, which is
Detached, semi-detached.
semi-detached, detached, and which is a small fraction of the actual population. Let's say 20, 30, 40%. I don't know the number, but it's not the full population. The renters have no incentive to retrofit a house that they're renting in. The homeowner has no incentive to retrofit a house that he's rented out. So all of these renters, so the in the majority of Canadians, I mean, there's a reason affordable housing is an issue. It's because most people are not living in their own houses. They're renting and it's not affordable. So for them, there are no incentive for the majority of the population to move in that direction, whether it is a rent incentive or whether it is a. So that's one part of the problem, and the other part of it, the problem is that in urban areas, in condo living, for example, um, condos that were built before a certain time period still are using those manual where you can't tell the difference between 26.5 and 27, which.
Oh, the dials which you have
Yeah,
to adjust
yeah.
manually. Yeah.
So like little things like that do end up making a difference, even if it's a 20%, 30% reduction in cost. Um, there is right now no incentive, for example, for condo owners to be installing Nest or Ecobee. So just to give you some example that there, we are trying to do something on the retrofitting side. It's not enough. It's not
The
smart.
incentives are not aligned. So how do we fix this? Like, what can be
And
done?
it has to be something that has to be pushed through at the political party level. Yeah, as I always say, engage with your party, whichever party you support, and go give them these ideas for your own regional areas. And if there's enough of a movement from the party grassroots around this, um, it's doable. And it's, by the way, it's good for the economy as well, because look, there's a need to incentivize the production of uh, renewable products,
Technologies, yeah.
yeah, and services, and become a lead. I mean, I think China is a great example. So just to step away from insulation and into solar, um, the supply chain for solar is owned by China.
Yes.
In
Solar
some.
panels.
Yeah, solar panels. When Obama was there, Obama enacted laws for rebates around solar. They were taken up by California, some other states. There was massive amount of investment in solar, but all the investment that happened in solar in the US was around how to sell the product, how to do the software piece of it. All the hardware manufacturing, all the panel manufacturing was done out of China. And they have built out a huge, very nice supply chain for it, but which now, keeping in mind the political situation between China and North America, is becoming like,
Very
just like,
difficult.
yeah,
Wait, so are you saying that all those incentives, all of those green energy programs and solar panel programs to install panels in the homes, where did those solar panels come from? They came from China. So the
yeah,
money was paid to China.
yeah, mostly. I mean,
Okay.
and not all of them.
Right.
There were some companies that were manufacturing out in California as well.
Right.
It's not that every company manufactured out in China. uh, there were some programs that were put in place where a lot of money was given to put up manufacturing this was one of the scandals, by the way, out of the program, that there was some parties that were given a lot of money to put up manufacturing in the US, but it never materialized, or at least never materialized to the point
Oh.
where
So then they never, the US expected these companies to build out solar panel manufacturing capability in the US, but these companies reneged. They went back on their word. They never delivered
Look,
these capabilities.
when you say reneged, I mean, I'm not trying to throw mud at anyone over here.
Mm.
I'm just saying that, look, the way that the U.S. economy is structured
Mhm.
is that even when you bring about incentives for people to manufacture over here, and at the same time you're competing with the Chinese cheaper panels which are coming in, which might be less effective, or may not be. I don't know. I mean, in some cases they were. In
Maybe at
some,
one point they were, yeah.
yeah, in some cases, no, it's not.
Yeah.
At one point, it's that there are 50 different companies in China. Some manufacture at a
Sure.
very high quality and some manufacture at a very poor quality, like always.
We can probably just assume that the more expensive ones are high quality and efficient.
And that's
The
exactly
cheaper
it.
ones are low quality.
That's and what ends up happening, as with any industry, when you have cheap solar panels that are available, I mean, I don't see like 10 big American companies that came out of that incentive program, or Canadian companies that came out of that incentive program, that are dominating the market. What came out of that incentive program was that when you look at China, there are a few big players who have established themselves thanks to the green initiatives that were launched by Obama in the US. They built out the supply chain for solar panels, and they have been then able to use that technology to feed their own market in China and become some of the best panel manufacturers and suppliers. So, but taking a step back, what I'm trying to say is that on the solar, so there's insulation, where there's a misalignment of
Incentives.
incentives. On the solar panel side of things, I think that solar panels have improved. They are dependent on batteries, so there are some challenges on that side. Same with wind, but also that some of the best manufacturing happens out in China. So any supply chain will need to consider that when we're looking at
I also,
solar.
yeah, I agree with you. Supply chain, absolutely. China, dependence on China. Are we walking into a similar trap like we did with the dependence on Russian hydrocarbons? We are, it seems like we are calmly walking into a very similar situation with China with dependence on solar panels. But I do also want to talk about one more thing, which is the end of life scenario of these technologies. So, for example, solar panels, they will end of life, these panels, individual panels will wear out and stop working in about what, 20, 25 years. Very
Yeah.
similar with wind turbine technology, wind blades. They'll stop working at a certain point, and at that point, what is the plan? What is the scenario for safely disposing of these these panels, these wind blade turbines? Because you remember, solar panels are made up of toxic elements like lead, silicates, and
Yeah.
other elements like that. There is no credible plan to safely dispose of these solar panels. It would the amount of money you would have to spend to set up a plan like that. I haven't heard of anybody either in the U.S. or in Europe doing anything like that. I mean, sure, there might be small scale efforts, but I don't realistically see governments ramping up on these efforts. Uh, Realistically, what's going to happen is that they're going to end up, these panels are going to be dumped in poorer countries where they're going to be ending up in landfills and or maybe in the oceans, and they're going to be leaching out their toxic materials over time and over the next few decades into the biosphere, into the ecosystem.
Which by the way, I completely agree with that. And like part of future industries is recycling of similar materials. It does need to be thought about. And unfortunately, like Western capitalism in its boom bust, where we can talk about how the bisons were wiped out, they never think that far ahead. It's always the next 10 years, not the next 25
In the
years.
private sector, it's the next quarter. Like,
Yeah,
sure,
in the
sure. The next the next board meeting is what you're planning for.
yeah, I know. Been there, done that.
Next shareholders meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's a very short-sighted view. Um, and I think the other piece of that is actually batteries, because you cannot make solar work without batteries. Solar,
You cannot make any renewable energy source work without it. Solar, wind.
yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing that is not talked about often enough is that we have created also a lithium dependency. Lithium is not, by the way, as readily available material. It is only found in some places of the world. It is absolutely where it is mined. It is a destruction of the economy, of the environment around it, not the economy, the environment around it. Um, it is toxic, and there are better materials that are coming out for lithium replacement, for battery replacement. um, there is iron age batteries, which is basically they use rusting to store energy, and are able to use rusting for that. There is graphene based batteries which are coming out. I'm hopeful about, and sodium based batteries. So I'm hopeful about like the different other types of batteries that come out. The question is, how quickly are they commercialized? How efficient are they? So graphene, we know, is 5 times more efficient than lithium already, and it's been talked about since about 10 years. There was even a Netflix program on it. Um, but are they commercially available? Are they No, not at this point. you know um, are they not at a scale where they can be put in a car or put in a house or put in an industrial
Right.
capacity?
Are these all of these alternative battery technologies viable in the next few decades? Like, let's talk about 2 decades from now, because 2 decades from now is kind of our do or die time for hitting our climate targets.
So I'd say graphene is definitely viable, because graphene has been in talked about for the past quite a 10 odd years. There's been lab batteries that have been made which are 5 times more efficient, and which are also less dangerous, because lithium tends to form these kind of like spikes that when they touch inside the battery, it can explode. Graphene is not like that. Graphene is a much safer kind of material. um, there's also the opportunity of looking at as I mentioned, iron air batteries used in rusting, and sodium based batteries. Now, sodium based batteries are interesting because when you talk about large scale storage, sodium and water is basically salt. So you can have large electricity storage in salt baths in one way. you know uh, for a better way of explaining it. So there are some interesting technologies out there, but I think when we're talking about storage, storage happens in a few ways: chemical, physical, and nuclear. So let's touch on that topic.
Yeah, we are definitely interested in all of these alternative energy sources. So we talked about solar, we talked about wind a little bit. We didn't talk so much about geo and hydro, but those are definitely in the back in the mix as well. Now, yeah, let's talk about nuclear. So there's a lot of uncertainty and lot of opinions about nuclear. One thing we have seen for sure is that um, there are certain countries in the world and jurisdictions and places that heavily rely on nuclear power. Many other places are quickly trying to shut down nuclear. So what's really going on? What's the truth? Well, let's look at, for example, Ontario. Right here in Ontario, uh, Ontario is mostly driven by nuclear energy. Ontario electricity is mostly generated nuclear, uh, about 70% ish. Okay, so Ontario has achieved one of the biggest decarbonizations in North America. Our air is clean, our water is pure. Our rates of respiratory diseases caused by pollution, dust, smog, these kinds of things. These kinds of things are unheard of in Ontario. Like, whereas if you look at other countries, like let's say you look at Delhi, is famous for its unbreathable air and the lung diseases that people that suffer there. Chicago is hugely dependent on nuclear energy. Many countries are ramping up and building nuclear energy. So what's the problem actually with nuclear? Why are European countries so seemingly hell bent on shutting down their nuclear?
I think I can add some context to that problem area, because I belong to the people who believe that,
Skeptics.
to the skeptics. um, and to me, this is what I grew up with, and I don't have enough information, because I have started changing my point of view. But this is what I grew up with. One, keeping Chernobyl, Hiroshima, all of these incidents, Fukushima in mind, the danger associated with nuclear energy. There is a danger, definitely. Number two, of a nuclear accident or something to that effect. So that's one. Number two, is storage of nuclear waste, how much nuclear waste is produced, and how do you store it, and what happens to that nuclear waste. Because, when we talk about renewables, just like you pointed out that there's a waste production on solar, what happens to those panels, right? That needs to be taken into the equation of whether or not it's clean or not, and so does the waste produced by nuclear. And that waste is nuclear waste as well as additional waste such as what's happening in Fukushima and the water storage that is being done over there. And keep in mind, it also is related to what we've been taught about climate change, and how nuclear affects that, as well as the horrific pictures of the accidents that have happened, and what it does to humans or to life when we talk about nuclear. So I think those are some of the big issues that worry uh, me, and a lot of people of my generation, around and this is what we grew up with, which we were taught this in schools. So you know
I understand. I understand what you're saying, and I've heard this very similar issues from many people. I feel like your standard people the amount of knowledge that people have about nuclear is very spotty. I feel like, let me for example give you a few rebuttals. If we're talking about nuclear energy generation, we're talking about nuclear fission generation power plants. We're not talking about nuclear bombs, right? Nuclear
yeah.
weaponry is, very different conversation, like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and nuclear test sites in the Pacific, things
Yeah.
like that. uh, that's a completely different conversation that should be treated differently, because every technology can be weaponized, obviously.
Yeah.
Even solar power can be weaponized to, if you build a magnifying lens and set things on fire. Anyway,
How
my
did
point
you know
is,
I was building that?
ah, Nabil, you got caught, man. Listen, sunlight has exposed you. Um, anyway, so yeah, I want to kind of debunk some of these myths about nuclear power, and a lot of people are going about doing this. For example, if you look at Canadians for Nuclear Energy,
Hmm.
there's an organization. The president is Dr. Chris Kiefer. He often goes on media and he campaigns for nuclear energy. And the things that people hear about nuclear are kind of misleading or untrue. So, for example, Fukushima and the accident at Fukushima and the contaminated water. Yes, there was an accident at Fukushima because of Japan, unfortunately, being in the ring of fire in an earthquake and tsunami prone region. So they had a reactor leak, not a meltdown. There was a leak, and some water leaked out into the ocean. However, the contamination in that water, you would have to drink that water for 1,000 years to get the amount of radiation exposure that you get from going through an X-ray machine.
Hmm.
So the amount of radiation in that exposed leaked water, contaminated water, is so negligible that it like people worry about things like this basically by hyperinflating the statistics or the risks of things that they don't know, much above the risks of things that they do know. For example, it's a well-known fact that flying is the safest way to travel, and traveling and vehicles on the road is much more dangerous than flying, right? So, but why are people so much more afraid of flying? It's because they're afraid of the unknown, right? Like if you don't
Yeah.
know something, you're going to be afraid of it. So does that mean we should shut down air travel? Well, maybe that's a different conversation with regards to climate change, but it doesn't mean that we should shut it down because it's more
Yeah.
dangerous, because it's not. So I feel similar with nuclear. Now, you mentioned nuclear waste, storage of the waste, longevity of the waste. Now, very little of the nuclear waste produced by nuclear fission reactors is high-level nuclear waste, what you would call things that are radioactive for 1,000 years. We have safe ways to store high-level waste. In fact, high-level waste, nuclear storage, or toxic waste storage is pretty much the only viable waste storage for any technology that we have today. If you're talking about burning of fossil fuels, the waste from that burn, from combustion of fossil fuels, is released into the atmosphere, and people are breathing it,
Yeah.
in particulates, and people are dying of diseases, lung diseases, lung cancers. Just look at Delhi, for example. Nuclear waste to storage and disposal, safe storage, safe disposal. The size of the amount of nuclear waste that you can cram, into, like, let's say, a football stadium, will power our civilization on Earth for thousands of years.
Yeah,
It would.
and I think that this was a question
Yeah.
I was asking you earlier before we started this discussion. Um, to me, and this is one of the reasons that I am 50-50, because I don't have enough information. To me, if that nuclear waste is, as you know, there's radioactive material under the earth right now, which exists
There are
natural.
active nuclear fission reactions going on in the Earth right now, solely due to geothermal pressures in the Earth
Yes.
that triggered these nuclear fission reactions. Right now, it's happening.
Yeah, yes. And to me, the question really ends up being like, hey, if our waste production is something like 0.2% of the actual radioactive material being created in the earth right now, then like
It seems that should be a no-brainer,
it
right?
should be a no-brainer. But if it is something like we're going to increase the nuclear energy, the nuclear radioactive material in the earth by fivefold in the next 10 years, then it's a no-brainer not to do it. And so there are nuances to the discussion which I think are never brought, and that's one of the reasons I've become very 50-50 about it. Another one that I think we can touch on the nuclear waste, and maybe you have more information on this than I do, which is like, hey, not everything has to be done with uranium and plutonium. There's new materials like thorium, which are safer, and I don't know how much safer they are, or because I'm uninformed. This is me having a discussion with somebody else on the issue, and them telling me, well, have you looked into like X generation reactors which are based off of this material? And the thing that I noticed was that they are way more efficient, and way less nuclear waste. So do you have any input on that?
Yeah, first of all, let me just follow up on the high level waste thing. So
Yeah, please do.
we are safely containing those high level wastes in safe storage, so which blocks radioactivity from leaching into the earth, into the
Mhm.
ecosystem. So it's not that we are contributing to an increased amount of radioactivity throughout the earth and throughout the ecosystem by using a nuclear fission and disposing of those toxic wastes. No, we have very safe storage sites which completely block off, and we are prepared to, we built those sites and those disposal sites in such a way that they will last for thousands of years.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, another thing, much of the nuclear waste produced is actually recyclable, and it is recycled.
Hmm. So new
It's
to me.
recycled as lower grade fuel. Many reactors can use that, and they do use it as lower grade fuel. So they keep cycling the fuel through the reactors
Hmm.
at different stages of its life cycle. And what happens also is that many of the nuclear materials that you get out of the fission process are actually um, critical medical uh, components. For example, for X-ray machines, for cancer treatments,
Hmm.
for many of these things, you need nuclear materials that you only get from nuclear power plants,
Yeah.
which is why Ontario has a secure supply of these materials,
Hmm. Hmm.
and
Hmm.
other places where they have nuclear power.
Which is also, by the way, one of the reason that Iran gives for wanting to have a nuclear program, by the way.
Yes, I mean,
Which is a different topic
it's a
altogether.
different
Let
topic. Iran is a bit dodgy because we're not sure whether they're trying to make nuclear power or weaponry. That's the problem with Iran. Anyway, so so there's a lot of facets to nuclear. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misapprehensions.
Yeah.
I feel like if we listen to experts, energy experts, hell, even listen to Greta Thunberg, she is pro-nuclear now.
Yeah.
Okay, so that should kind of tell you like what is the level of uh, reality that we are facing on this planet, that we just don't have the the energy, the fuels, the alternative fuels that we're looking at, solar, wind, thermal, geo, they don't have the energy density you need to power a technologically advanced civilization like ours. Okay, now I know we're not exactly Star Trek level, but we are still highly dependent on technology and energy. So we need high density energy. Nuclear is one of the highest density energy. Nuclear fuel is one of the highest density energy fuels that you can get.
So I think there's two positives and one negative that I'll mention. I'll sandwich them. I think the first positive is that Canada is a in conclusion. This is kind of my conclusion to this. Um, uh, the the first positive is that Canada is one of the foremost manufacturers of nuclear technologies, and then there's going to be required across the world. And we're making small sized modular reactors is what we're able to build, and this will definitely help the Canadian economy in the long run. It's Canada is the second largest producer of uranium and roughly provides 13% of the global output. So that's one of the positives. One of the negatives is that, keeping the Ukraine war in mind, um, Russia, Kazakhstan, and Niger. And Niger also is in the Russian sphere of influence at this point. Provide about 40 to 50% of the nuclear material used around the world. So that's one of the challenges out there. Yes, I know Australia, and but I think 40%, 30 to 40% of the nuclear energy that Europe uses is provided by Russia or Kazakhstan, and another 20% by Niger. So I'm referencing it from the perspective of the war in Ukraine, right?
Sure.
And the sanctions that are in place. So I think that's one of the big challenges, and I think one of the biggest opportunities is that there are two types of nuclear reaction: fusion and fission. We have been talking mostly about one type. I think
We've been talking about fission.
yes.
To be honest with you, Nabil, fusion, we are still decades away from
I
productionizing.
I understand that we're decades
Maybe
away
a
from.
century.
I understand that we're decades away from doing that, but both in the US last year and in China the year before that, there were massive breakthroughs in the nuclear fission space.
Fusion. I agree.
Yeah, fusion space. And to me, the reason it's important is because the magnitude of power produced between fission and fusion, the difference in the magnitude of power that can be produced, because the reactor that they're putting up in China or in the US, any one of them goes up and is able to produce the energy that potentially we have calculated, it would power the whole of the earth.
Well, the more important reason is because of the clean energy output of the fusion reaction.
Yes.
The output of the reaction is just you're going to get water. You're
Yeah.
not going to get toxic waste. But yeah, again, Nabil, I would caution you, even though there is optimism, we should still take it. The timeline is in decades from now.
I agree
We're
with
not
you.
gonna. It's not going to be a viable way of reaching our climate crisis goals
I agree with
Yeah.
you on that.
in the next 2 decades. No, absolutely not.
Yeah. I mean, just like for example, graphene. It's been known that graphene has it's been over 20 years. It's still not commercially. You can't go
Why
into
is it still not commercialized? Because these things take time to
this
develop.
takes
Yeah.
forever. You can't go into a store and buy a graphene-based battery today. It's been over 20 years since the properties were discovered, and you know. So yeah, I think that there's some positives there. Just to end the conversation.
I think we could keep going for hours and hours on this,
I
but
know.
we should end somewhere. So
Yeah, I wanted to bring in those couple of points as way to finish off the discussion. Anything that you want to mention? for
Yeah, I
that.
want to add that this is a very fascinating and very important topic, and I want everybody to think about this and research, do your own research, and see what our energy situation is really like, and go and talk to politicians and become active. You know, it's very important. This is a crucial time. In the next couple of decades, we are basically looking at the climate crisis falling off. Kind of like we're on the edge of a cliff right now. So this is the time. If you want to do something, this is the time.
Yeah, definitely. And we will catch you again in the next episode of the Unknown podcast at this time. Yeah, that's the name we're going with. Take care. Bye, guys.
Cheers. Okay, let's hope this thing